Well, we haven't seen any real impact from it so far. The gas is still flowing out of Qatar, and at the moment we have a situation where we have a lot of LNG in the market, which is keeping the pricing down, which has actually been very good, stimulating demand for LNG. And I don't see that changing in the short term, certainly. The Qataris, I think, have got a very good reputation for being very reliable suppliers. They're keeping that up. There hasn't been a change in that. Now, what happens further down the road if the sanctions increase, if things change, that's a little bit difficult to say. But right now, we're not seeing any disruption to the markets from what's happening.
How difficult is it making your life as you ship this stuff around the world? Because clearly we have seen blockades imposed around Qatar by these neighbours who are in dispute with the country.
To be honest, it's a nuisance rather than a real issue. You can't go into Fujairah, for example, to bunker before you go into Qatar, things like that. But in general, that doesn't really affect the shipping so far. So it hasn't had a major effect on us as a company. I don't think it's had an effect on the LNG shipping fleet in general.
I mean, it's interesting the way the Qataris are responding to this is by threatening a price war in the LNG market by increasing output quite dramatically. Do you think that in itself will be a good news story for you or a bad news story? I mean, you mentioned how lower prices help stimulate demand.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at what they've said, they're going to increase their production from 77 million tonnes up to about 100 million tonnes over the next 5 to 7 years. There's been a huge build out in LNG over the last 5 years. If you go from 2015 to 2020, around 50% increase in production for LNG. But after 2020, there hasn't been those new final investment decisions taken. This Qatari gas is likely to come after that point, which I think is actually going to be needed as the market goes into rebalance with LNG. So I think it's actually positive. The more tonnes that are shipped, the better it is for us as service providers in the shipping market.
So more broadly speaking, as long as the crisis goes on, is it fair to say Qatar's growth has been stunted? It's making it very hard to invest for the future and plan for the future when you've got issues that are taking place around the region, even though you're saying what you've had in the business has been protected or not impacted so far. Very different when you talk about more capex spend, expansion, consolidation in the industry.
Yeah, well, I think this is a fairly recent news that they're going to expand their production. They certainly have the ability to do it. They're going to be they're very low-cost providers with their gas fields, with their brownfield sites. But the story around LNG is not just about Qatar. You are seeing massive increases in production right now in Australia and in the US. We've just seen the first US cargo come into the UK since 1960. Sure. So suddenly, LNG is becoming very much a global industry. And I think if there were issues with Qatar, it's much more able to absorb those shocks as it's expanding and becoming, gas coming from many, many different areas.